when we think of Dodge City. We can't think about it without thinking of Hollywood lore. Gunsmoke, one of the longest running television series in history. But there's a lot more to Dodge City then and now than just our Western history. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but there were different countries that actually governed over Ford County, where Dodge City is located in the past. Those countries were Spain, France, Mexico, the Republic of Texas, and of course, the United States, not surprising. Those countries each brought rich cultures and heritage to our area that still is remnant today.
The land we know today as Ford County and Dodge City lies where a once great river we call the Arkansas is crossed by an imaginary line, the 100th meridian. People had lived here for many thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans, so who was here first was never really in question. Even so, European explorers claimed the land for their various nations under the doctrine of discovery, originally decreed by Pope Nicholas V in 1452 for Portugal. Later, Spain requested that they be included. Pope Alexander VI in 1493 continued the doctrine of discovery. By international law, these nations could seize land, possessions, and even the people of any territory not inhabited by Christians. The doctrine of discovery would profoundly affect the shape of the country and the fate of its indigenous people. It was incorporated by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1823 and is still a part of U.S. law today.
The history of the Five Flags is so riven with conflict and colonization and oppression in a lot of ways, because the Spanish, the French, eventually the British, and eventually the United States, as they come to the area, they're much more interested in the land and what the land can produce value-wise for an imperial government than they are interested in the people that own the land, say Native Americans that have been there for a long time, or the people that the colonizers will bring to the land to work the land, say African or Caribbean slaves.
Leading the first European expedition to this territory was Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, come all the way from New Spain, now Mexico. It was his last-ditch attempt to find and conquer for Spain the legendary golden city of Quivira, the name of a great river in Spain. Coronado referred to the people there as Quivirans. Coronado was spurred on by the stories spun by his guide, a native man the Spanish had named the Turk, and he was empowered by the doctrine of discovery.
The Coronado expedition crossed a turbulent river on that day, which was a holy day in Europe. Father Padilla celebrated a massive Thanksgiving for their safe passage across the river. The Coronado expedition followed the north bank of the river east. The Coronado Cross was a bicentennial project dedicated on July 4th, 1976, and it recognized the American, Indian, Spanish, and Mexican heritages.
Coronado praised the land as rich and promising for agriculture. Father Padilla saw it as a potential area for missionary work. Coronado made an indelible impression on the land and its people, and he had left behind a world-changing technology that would revolutionize native culture. In 1682, the French explorer Sieur de la Salle descended the Mississippi to its mouth and claimed the entire region for Louis XIV of France. It was called Louisiana, and the land that would become Kansas was now under a French flag. In the 1720s, the French opened trading with the Indians, including Kiowa, Plains Apache, and Comanche. French traders seeking furs exchanged manufactured items, including guns, with the Plains Indians. The Indians made annual trips to New Mexico and grew dependent on the trade with the French and Spanish, and it hastened their conquest. The Treaty of Paris, that ended the French and Indian War between France and Britain, gave the Louisiana Territory to the Spanish. Kansas was briefly again a Spanish territory. By the time the King of Spain returned Louisiana to France in 1800, a new nation had been born, and the port of New Orleans was crucial to the trade and sovereignty of the young United States.
And President Jefferson and his advisors and his negotiators, at first they think they're just going to buy New Orleans. Jefferson sends negotiators to Paris to offer to purchase New Orleans literally just for a sum of money, a few $1 million or so. Napoleon's negotiators counteroffer to sell not just New Orleans to the United States, but the entire Louisiana Territory. And the negotiators are absolutely shocked. And they realize that this is going to be a great deal, so they very quickly finalize negotiations to buy the whole territory. And that's where the United States takes over the Louisiana Territory, and that's where places like what is today Western Kansas and Dodge City pass from French control to U.S. control.
Sent to explore the vast new territory were the well-known Lewis and Clark and Zebulon Pike. Pike followed the Arkansas River from today's Great Bend, Kansas, to a point near its source in Colorado. His description spurred the next explorers, traders, and settlers, and created interest in the region. The Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819 set the 100th meridian as part of the border between the U.S. and New Spain. It crossed right through the future location of Dodge City, making this a major camping site near several crossings of the Arkansas used by the Santa Fe traders. A marker commemorates the meridian, which symbolized the border, where east ended and the west began. Finally, Mexico won independence from Spain, and Santa Fe was open to U.S. traders. That same year, a lucky Missouri trader named William Becknell discovered a trail wide enough to accommodate a wagon all the way from Missouri to Mexico. The Santa Fe Trail became the international highway of its day. As the railroads built westward after the Civil War, Mexican merchants engaged their freighters to haul merchandise from the end of the track to Santa Fe and on into Mexico. The rut trails from covered wagons are still visible after more than 150 years at the Santa Fe Trail rut site. In 1836, Texas won independence from Mexico. Kansas, or at least part of it, was now under the dominion of its fourth nation, the Republic of Texas. Texas claimed land from 42 degrees north as far south as the Rio Grande. In 1850, the current boundary was established. Treaties were signed with local tribes to protect the all-important trail. Forts were established, the last being Fort Dodge. And yet trade, not warfare, had dominated the relationship between the native people and the white population until the Mexican War. Then Indian opposition increased as thousands of U.S. troops and hundreds of wagon trains carrying military supplies traveled the Santa Fe Trail. Indians resisted the fouling of water holes, destruction of the land and bison, and failure of the military supply trains to offer trade items. Diseases and alcohol introduced by traders would kill many times the number of natives that warfare would. Just as the American Civil War ended, the so-called American Indian War was at a boil. Into this cauldron poured white settlers and traders, spurred by the 1862 Homestead Act, granting free land to settlers. Ford County was not a place for digging gold, but it was a gateway to the gold rush in Colorado. Dodge City itself started not with a bang, but with a trickle of whiskey. No drinking was allowed at the Fort Dodge encampment. So, nearby, a brisk trade sprung up servicing the soldiers and ever-increasing traffic going west. In 1872, out of a ramshackle collection of tents, lean-tos, and a few frame buildings known as Front Street, Dodge City was founded just in time for the railroad to arrive, bringing with it modern Victorian society and making Dodge a permanent beef production capital. By 1878, the house-high stacks of buffalo hides were gone from Front Street. The buffalo and buffalo hunters were virtually extinct. The wild had gone out of the Wild West. In 1882, Fort Dodge was abandoned. In 1890, on the site of the decommissioned fort, the Kansas Soldiers' Home was opened, and the American frontier was closed. Just after the turn of the century, the railroad began building rudimentary housing for Mexican workers on railroad property. The Mexican Village, as it was called, was home to dozens of Mexican families from the early 1900s to the mid-1950s. Mexican immigrants were integral to Dodge City's success. The men of the village kept the railroad running. Immigration continued into Ford County and increased with the opening of meatpacking industries in the 1980s. Today, the city celebrates a population that is 64% Hispanic or Latino. Additionally, according to the United States Census, over half of the households in the area speak a language other than English in their home.
We talked about being governed by 5 flags before. Well, today, within our school system, USD 443, there are 45 different countries represented and 20 languages spoken. Think about that for a moment.
When we think about the history of the 5 flags, that's what I think of the most, is we have to come to terms with that history in order to build a better future for this very international hub of people from the Caribbean, originally from Africa, from the Spanish Empire, coming down from Canada and coming west from the eastern United States. And personally, I think that's one of the great challenges and opportunities that we have in the 21st century as a global population.
To the 5 flags waving over their history, Dodge City and Ford County have added many flags. International politics, the wars, the discoveries, the atrocities, and the triumphs of 5 centuries. They came together here. East met west at a fateful spot where an imaginary line crossed the great river. Today, diversity can be seen and experienced every day throughout the community. Cultural diversity is celebrated with festivals and events, including the annual International Festival, Cinco de Mayo celebrations, and holiday posadas. Businesses, nonprofits, and schools come together to welcome new residents to the area. The economy supports the local small business owners, where a majority of the businesses are owned by minorities. Diversity has always been in Ford County and will continue to be embraced.